Canadians have a right to know which programs he'd be cutting.
What would I cut? I'd start with the $54 million ArriveCan app that is now under police investigation.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. We're back to question period today, where things turned a little strange when the Conservatives gave the Bloc a standing ovation.
Let's take a look.
Long, miserable years. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He massively increased the money supply by $600 billion, inflating housing costs by over 100%. That forced one C-SPAN shipyard worker I met last week to buy a normal house for over $1 million. And now interest rates have gone up because of inflationary deficits, something the Prime Minister promised would not happen. And he's forced to pay $7,500 a month on his mortgage while supporting his 3 kids. Will the Prime Minister reverse his inflationary spending so that this gentleman and his wife and 3 kids can afford to keep their home?
All right, everybody, back to question period. Back to speaking directly to the Canadian public via the second camera in the House. Not speaking to Trudeau, not speaking to Greg Fergus. He is talking to you and talking to all of the potential voters that may be undecided at this point. And that guy in BC, $7,500 a month. He must be going into debt at the end of every month.
Well, I read a statistic that said, and this is just off the top of my head, so hopefully I'm not mistaken, but Canadians are paying something like 63% of their take-home wages for housing.
Yeah. And you don't have a lot left over, but this guy must be working just extreme amounts of overtime or has a second job. His wife probably has a job. You know, that's not sustainable. And a lot of that is interest. Like, that's just insane. Now, the interesting thing is Pierre hasn't really deviated too much from his strategy from the summer. Why? Because it's working. So it may sound a little repetitive, but they've added a new slogan. He's not worth the cost.
He's not.
He's not. It's true. He has to keep something fresh and have to keep something repetitive so it just sticks into your brain. And he's hoping that the repetition will just kind of subconsciously eat its way into the Liberal voters' psyches. So when they think of Justin Trudeau, they think he's not worth the cost. But it shows in the polls that this is working. There was a Nanos poll released on October 13th, and it was the widest margin ever since Pierre became leader of the opposition in a Nanos poll, a Liberal-friendly poll. The Conservatives were up by 15 points, 40% versus the Liberals' 25%. That's a massive lead. So, as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
One thing is clear, the cuts, the austerity that are proposed by the leader of the official opposition would not help that family, would not help Canadians from coast to coast be able to afford a new home. That is or the homes they're living in even. That is why we're continuing to work right across the country to bring forward ambitious and community-specific solutions to the housing problems they're facing. We've signed Housing Accelerator Fund agreements with London, with Vaughan, with Halifax, with Hamilton, with the province of Quebec, with more to come, Mr. Speaker. The cuts he's proposing won't help Canadians. Our investments, done responsibly, will continue to help Canadians.
That's right. Hear, hear.
Okay, the Liberal campaign platform is now revealed. They're not going to be talking about what they're doing for Canadians as much as they're going to be trying to scare everybody into what the boogeyman Conservatives are going to be cutting.
Well, because they have nothing to offer. All they have to offer Canadians is poverty, homelessness, drug addiction. So, of course, they're going to, rag on the Conservatives. They have nothing else.
But they have a AAA credit rating.
Ooh la la.
Middle-class shipyard worker paying $7,500 a month on his mortgage is living austerity now. The Prime Minister is talking about is abundance for government and austerity for working class people who must carry him and his overpriced bureaucracy around on their backs. Mr. Speaker, this gentleman has 3 kids to raise in their adolescence, paying for their sports while keeping a roof overhead. How does he expect them to pay $7,500 a month to fund his overpriced interest rates that result from his deficits?
So I want to make a slight correction to the stat I gave earlier. It's the average Canadian household is spending 60% of their income on ownership costs. And that's by BNN Bloomberg. I'll throw that link in the description in case you guys want to see it for yourselves. But that is astronomical. Most lenders, like your bank or your mortgage broker, will tell you that you should not be spending more than 30% of your income on your housing. And Canadians are spending double that.
Well, and they will say that a healthy amount to save after each paycheck is 20 to 30%. That's after expenses. After. You're paying 60% just on your home? There's no way. No way you're saving any money at the end of that paycheck.
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is proposing to cut spending. Well, the reality is we have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7. And we've preserved our AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. We are fiscally responsible as we support people with things like the grocery rebate, with investments that are bringing down inflation, working with the different grocery companies. But the reality is Canadians have a right to know which programs he'd be cutting. Would he be cutting child care for families? Would he be cutting dental care for kids? Would he be cutting pensions for seniors? Because, Mr. Speaker, he has campaigned against all 3 of those measures for Canadians. That's right.
So I find it incredible that Trudeau is standing there trying to justify spending money, like trying to justify driving up our debt every year, even more than it already is. Driving up the interest that we pay on that every year, even more than it already is. It's just astounding that he's standing there saying, we shouldn't be cutting spending, we should be spending more.
Well, and then he throws out these statistics that, yes, they're true, but... So in this case, he said that we have the lowest deficit in the G7. Maybe that's true, but we also have the lowest population. This graph is from, well, the most recent result is from 2021, but Canada's the blue line at the bottom. We've got the least amount of people out of all the other countries. So one would assume that we would have the lowest debt because we don't have as many people to take care of as the other countries. It'd be like me saying, hey, I won the coloring contest, and not telling you that all the other entrants were children.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. And what would I cut? I'd start with the $54 million ArriveCan app that is now under police investigation. And then I'd get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank that pays bonuses but hasn't completed a single infrastructure project, Mr. Speaker. And why don't we throw in the $100 million plus contracts to McKinsey, a company that helped cause the opioid crisis. But speaking of all the waste that he forces on Canadian taxpayers, when it comes to the ArriveCan app, which is now under police investigation, he covered up a previous bad behavior under SNC Lavalin. Will he at least cooperate with the RCMP investigation into the ArriveCan app?
Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to, Trudeau.
Well, I just want to branch off of something that Pierre said. I mean, of course Trudeau's not interested in suing these medicine companies that cause the opioid crisis. He wants to partner with them and hand out hard drugs to Canadians on the government's dime. And actually, I should say on the taxpayers' dime.
Yeah, your money. Your money creating
chaos,
a cesspool of addiction and the cause of deaths of thousands due to overdoses.
Sheer chaos. That's what Trudeau wants in this country.
Yeah, he wants to replicate the BC experiment because that works so well. But it's funny that Trudeau is saying, oh, is he going to cut dental care? Is he going to cut child care? And again, Pierre's team is on point because they know that this is a classic Liberal talking point against the Conservatives. Oh, they're going to cut. What are they going to cut? And they think that there's no other answers but the programs that the Liberals and the NDP put in. So Pierre is ready with the counter on that. So he can point out existing scandals like the Arrive Can app. It's only $54 million, but it's also $54 million.
Of taxpayer money. Again, it's money that they're taking from you and me and all of us.
And the $35 billion infrastructure bank that hasn't completed a single project, absolutely. Take it all back. $100 million to McKinsey, who encouraged the opioid crisis to occur here. And they're also tied to World Economic Forum and all of that bullshit. So yeah, that's one to take away. So it was a great rebuttal, and that's $35.15 billion in taxpayer money that you can claw right back. That almost gets you to a balanced budget, by the way, in terms of what the Liberals are spending this year. Almost. So a snap of his fingers, dental care would stay, child care would stay, and budget is balanced. It's not hard, folks. It's not hard.
Maybe if you had somebody who was actually good with financials as the finance minister, you know, maybe we'd have a balanced budget.
Well, let's not be talking common sense here.
Donald, member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of talk about CBC management these days, and never for the right reasons. The N-word controversy, the podcast that was translated in Paris because the Quebec accent doesn't apparently travel well, and now they send a memo to their journalists reminding them not to refer to Hamas as terrorist. We know that Hamas's heinous attacks are terrorism. Journalists know it. They know how and when to use words, even the most sensitive ones. Will the minister remind CBC management that newsrooms must remain free of political and ideological influence?
Standing ovation from a bunch of the Conservatives on that one. That was a great point by the Bloc, calling out CBC for having political and ideological interference just completely detract from the subject in which they're reporting on. This is something that all Canadian news agencies should have been in complete agreement on, no matter which way they lean, because there is no leaning when it comes to what happened in Israel. And if what happened today was proven to be at the fault of the Israelis, then it should be called out the exact same way. There is no room for civilian casualties on either side.
Yeah, you can point out atrocities and condemn atrocities without picking a side.
But I'm sorry, when you send a bunch of thugs in, shoot up a music festival, kidnap a bunch of women and children, and do horrendous things to them, that's terrorism, folks. Full stop. That's what it is. And they were told not to call them that. Like, it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter what skin color, that's what it is. But this is where the left is. And this is where the CBC has no respect, because it's quite obvious who's pulling the strings.
Clear. Hamas has been recognized as a terrorist organization and a terrorist group. We have said that repeatedly, and the Prime Minister has said that. But we also believe in an independent CBC. That is what the CBC is. It has been that way under Liberal and Conservative governments. Conservatives may want to meddle in independent journalism. They can't seem to keep their hands out of public institutions, but we will keep working hard to ensure that Canadians get access to
Yeah, the Conservatives aren't having any of that.
CBC is not independent. We are independent, but we will be the first to admit that this channel absolutely has a right-leaning bias.
It doesn't stop us for trying to report on things objectively and then adding our obviously biased opinion. Yes, we are biased, but We're biased to common sense. And if we're wrong, we try and correct ourselves. But for that guy, that liberal, to go on and say it's the conservatives are the ones that want to influence independent media. Hello, Bill C-11. Hello, Bill C-18.
Yeah, the conservatives aren't the ones who are trying to shut down and censor independent media like Northern Perspective.
Like, God, I'm going to need a fire blanket. I'm being gaslit so much here.
The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives might want to clap a little less loudly. We know that journalists have to be independent, and we want to protect that. And they know all about loaded terminology. They know how to describe what Hamas did on October 7th. That's their job. But for management to issue a directive is something else entirely. It borders on censorship. CBC management are themselves muzzling the press, and they're taking a position that enters into the political debate, which isn't their role. Of course, CBC management is independent, but I'd like to ask the minister, does she think that as a matter of principle, it's desirable for CBC management to interfere in the work of its journalists?
Okay, we're not going to let him answer, but I think that was absolutely hilarious that the question was put towards the minister being a she, and then who stands up? Pablo the drunk Rodriguez, and the conservatives start jeering him for being like, oh, well, you do have long hair, Pablo. But yeah, that was the highlighted question period today, was the digs at CBC from the Bloc.
Speaking of CBC, it was very, very quick for me to find the contact information for the CBC Ombudsman. I actually typed CBCOM into Google, and it was the second pre-filled answer. So we're going to throw that up on the screen and share that for you guys. There is actually a link. I'm going to link it in our description, and it's got a contact form that you can fill in, and you can send them a message about their objectivity.
Yeah. Let them know your quote-unquote concerns. Is it going to go anywhere? I don't know. But it'll give somebody a hell of a lot of work to do over at the Ombudsman's office, and I don't think they have enough. So why don't we let them know our concerns?
And you can tell them that Talib Noor Muhammad told you to contact them.
There's your homework for today. Contact the CBC Ombudsman and let them know exactly what you think of their quote-unquote objectivity.